Hey y'all, I'm back with another Binespiration. I'm not an expert, I'm just a girl who loves God, just trying to make His word make sense in real life. And so, if you're trying to close the gap between faith and action, then this one's for you. So, have you ever looked at someone else and thought, if I had what they have, if I looked like them, if I spoke like them, if I had their platform, then maybe I could do what God called me to do? So, the irony of this video is that I recorded it 3 times. And the reason why I recorded it 3 times is because every time I recorded, I would play it back and I'd be like, this is not authentic, right? And it made me realize that when you're looking at other people and the way that they do things and what they have and, their flow and their swag, then it sort of makes you behave in an inauthentic way, and everybody can see it. Even you can see it, right? And so the whole point of this video is about being who you are, being grounded and rooted in your identity and how God made you and how He made you to do it. So let's get into it. So there's a story in scripture that reminds me exactly of how we look at our shortcomings and how we use those to dictate whether or not we can do what God has asked us to do, right? And it's the story of David and Goliath, but definitely, I know you probably heard the story of David and Goliath. Hear me out. I found something very interesting and new from the story that I never picked up before. It's more so rooted in identity than it is about facing your giants. And the Bible spends some time describing to us what Goliath looked like. So just to paint the picture for you, Israel was preparing to fight the Philistines. Israel is the Jewish people, the Philistines is some other people, right? And Saul was the acting king at the time. And David was anointed king, but he's just a kid at this point. So he's not walking in his kingship, right? And so David's going back and forth serving Saul and taking care of the sheep, which is what he did on a day-to-day. And so David shows up while the military is in battle formation. They're on 2 different mountains. There's like a ravine in between them. There's Israel and then there's the Philistines, and Goliath is with the Philistines. And so it tells us a lot about what Goliath looked like, that he was 9'9" tall, which I'm sure was an exaggeration. Goliath's helmet was bronze. His armor was bronze. It weighed about 125 pounds or more. He had shin guards, a javelin, a spear. Everything was bronze. And his spear, tells us the spearhead was 15 pounds. So he had a whole kettlebell on the end of his spear. They're really trying to let us know that this was a massive person, right? He had a shield bearer to stand in front of him to guard him. So basically with a shield. And so clearly the description is meant to intimidate. And that's exactly what happened. For 40 days while Israel's army was versus the Philistines, nothing's going on, but Goliath would stand there intimidating them. Hasn't popped off, just talking a bunch of junk. He already convinced Israel that they had been beat before even using any sort of weapon, before ever taking any action, which is so fitting because isn't it just like us to let our problems seem bigger than they are, to let them intimidate us before we even start, right? How many times have we allowed negative self-talk to keep us from doing something before we even took the first step? Like, I'm sure, I know for myself, I've experienced this. How many times has fear and comparison of somebody else's opinion, right? How many times has that defeated us before we have even started, right? I know for me, there have been seasons in my life where I shied away from the spotlight. Like every time I had opportunities and the opportunities started to come and compound, and I'm seeing the same thing today. Every time something, seems like I'm coming to something bigger, I take 10 steps back. So it's been as a minister, as a lawyer, as a speaker, so many times I have had that happen to me where I've sort of like, backed away from the spotlight. And so whether it was fear, intimidation, perfectionism, comparison, self-sabotage, all the things, whatever you want to call it, I got in my own way. And I let what was in front of me scare me into not taking action. Who can relate to that? And so I would say to God, look at them, look at what they have, or look how they look, or look what they can do, And sometimes we want God to say, okay, no problem. Here, have what they have, And God will let me know that you have everything that you need. No, you don't have what they have. No, you're not like them because I didn't make you like them, right? Comparison had me intimidated, right? And it had me chasing other people's identities because I focused on my lack. But God was inviting me to embrace my own identity and power and setting me up to shine in my own way. And I hope that you can relate to that what you're looking at as your lack is getting in your way, getting in the way of God showing you who you are and what you have and what you're already working with. That's awesome and amazing, and that he wants to use to accomplish what he wants to accomplish in your life, right? And David is a good example because he didn't have this problem. He was very confident in his unique abilities, and he was going to let everybody know. So David basically shows up on the scene, and he sees what's happening, and he sees Goliath intimidating Israel. He sees Israel being scared. He sees his older brothers who are supposed to be bigger and stronger than him because they're in the military, right? Those are the ones who his father had thought would have been the king, right? But they're scared. And everybody's counting David out. They're like, why are you even here, right? His brother was like, get out of here, you bother me, right? But David believed in himself. And he was like, listen, I got this. He was like, I'm going to convince Saul, who's the king, to let him try to beat Goliath because he knew that he could. And the reason he felt like he could is because he had evidence. He had the experience that he's been using all his life to get to where he is now, right? And I love the saying that says, you're here today because you've won every battle that you've ever had, which is true. If you're listening to me, you've won every battle that you ever had. So what makes you think because God has brought you through all this, he's taken you this far, that he's not going to do it again and in your next challenge, right? If God feeds the birds and clothes the flowers, then how much more will he care for us, his people that he created in his own image, right? And so whatever we need, God has already supplied it even before we knew that we needed it, right? If only, and I'm talking to myself as well, if only we could give God credit for his track record in our lives, like what he's already done, like saying, God, I know that if you've done all of these things already in my life, you're going to continue. You're going to get me through this day. You're going to get me through this week. You're going to get me through this month or this year, through the challenges that I'm going through. I know if you did it before, God, that you are going to do it again. You didn't bring me this far just to bring me this far. You got me, right? Let's have that mentality. And that was what David's perspective was. He said, while I was in the field guarding my sheep, I was fighting lions and tigers and bears, not really lions and bears. And God gave me a strategy to beat them, like just little old me. And I was successful. And so if God saved me from the lions and bears, ain't no reason why he ain't going to save me from this guy, right? He had no respect for Goliath. He wasn't scared. He did not think that it was a challenge, right? So even though Israel was scared, David didn't see that Goliath was too big to beat. He was like, this guy's too big to miss, if I'm using my skills and talents, right? So Saul hears this. Saul tries to help David by giving him his own armor to wear to fight Goliath. Because remember, David was coming out from the field, and he had no armor. He was basically had no protection. And this is very interesting because sometimes our family and friends will try to tell us what we need in order to do what we think that God is asking us to do. They'll tell us, you're going to need this, you're going to need that, you're going to need this, you're going to need to go to this school, you're going to need to have this amount of money, you're going to need to be in this place, in this city, and you need to make these connections. And while sometimes that's true for some people, right, it's not for people, even the ones who love us, to tell us how God is going to do what he's going to do in our lives, right? It's our job to trust God and let him guide us along that journey. And so in this story, David tried to put on Saul's armor, but he was not able to carry it because it was too heavy for him. Okay? He said, listen, I can't even walk in these. And so the armor wasn't bad of what Saul was trying to help him. It just wasn't David's. It wasn't David's armor. And David refused to become somebody else in order to defeat Goliath. And that's the same thing, right? I think we do this all the time. We try to wear somebody else's confidence, somebody else's personality, somebody else's ministry. We copy what works for people on social media, their voice, their appearance. Like I said, I was trying to do in the beginning of this video. It wasn't authentic for me. And we look at the way people speak. And even though we may not speak, as clearly, or we may stutter, or we may have our little quirks about us, but we try to do it like other people. And then we wonder why it doesn't fit, right? And then maybe that's why we're so exhausted. Message. So David did what he knew, right? He said, you come against me with the sword and the spear, but I come in the name of the Lord. And he picked up his 5 smooth stones and his slingshot, the tools that he had been using before that was authentically his style, not from fear, but from the faith that God got him, right? So he used the same skills that God had already developed in him through all the things that he had done in his life and all he had been through, his experience. And with only one of the stones, he defeated Goliath and he won. He won for his whole entire family, his nation, his military. He won. So what you are not doing could be holding back not only you, but your family, your community, your nation, because you're not operating in the way that you should in your own skin, with your own skills, with God, with what God has already given you. I heard that from me. The other thing that I noticed about David was that he never focused on what he didn't have, right? He didn't dwell on his size. He was just a kid. He was, presumably smaller in stature. He didn't complain that he didn't have armor or military training. He was like, I'm not even going to try to pretend like I could fight in this armor, right? He simply trusted that what God had already given him was enough. There will always be someone with more money, with more followers, with more connections, with more experience, more opportunities. But none of those things we may be lacking determine whether we're capable of doing what God has called us to do. God does. God determines that. So I'm going to leave you with this, right? Think about it. David never became Saul. David never even tried to become Goliath. David became David, and that's why he won. God never asked David to become anybody else. He simply asked him to trust him, right? God's not asking you or me to become anybody else. He's asking us to be us, our authentic selves, and use what he has already given us and trust him. So if you've been spending your energy, like I was, trying to become somebody else, lay down that armor because it was never yours to carry. Do it your own way with what you already have. Trust that what God has already placed in your hands, the lessons that he's already taught you, the way that he's made you is enough. Because clearly the giant is not going to be defeated by the heavier armor. It's defeated by the heart that is willing to trust God. So here's a question for this week. Think about it for me. What giant have you been making bigger than God? I'll see you in the next Binespiration.